back, everybody. Hope you're all perfectly caffeinated. So what you may have started to notice in the morning session, and what wasn't actually officially announced, is we actually saved the best stuff for the last day. And we're now going to talk a bit more about technology, so I'd like to welcome up Jessica Korte from the University of Queensland, who's going to be telling us about how Auslan can work with some new technologies she's working on. Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you. Alrighty. So, hey everyone, let's get into it. The project that I'm working on at the moment is the Auslan Communication Technologies Pipeline Project, which is a really fancy way of saying that we're trying to create an Alexa or Google Home type device that can understand Auslan. Now, we do have a bit of audience participation, and I know the title has given away some of the punchline here, but can you guys shout out, what are some of the ways you interact with and control technologies?
Speech.
Yep, I got voice, I got speech.
Keyboard.
Keyboard. Gestures. Yep, gestures and touch. That's our three main paradigms for technology control. And this idea of voice-controlled technology, what's sometimes referred to as conversational user interfaces, is becoming more and more common and mainstream, to the point where it's commercialized. Bit more audience participation. Can I get a hand up if you've got a personal assistant at home? Okay, maybe about a third of the audience there. So you know that these devices understand you, more or less, when you speak English. This technology is AI-based, and it's enabled by the fact that large tech companies have large data sets of spoken and written English. Also some other mainstream languages, let's call them, but English seems to be the driving one because a lot of this development is happening in America. This type of technology is really popular because it's trying to fulfill a promise of what we call ubiquitous computing. This is the idea that your computer is everywhere and your interactions with it will be normal and natural and not require much thought beyond how you phrase this. Again, we're not actually quite there yet, but that's the goal. The problem with, oh, everyone can just speak naturally, is that this technology is not actually accessible to everyone. And I work with the deaf community, who has a couple of barriers to their interaction with this technology. The first and most obvious one is audio. A deaf person whose first language is a sign language may have difficulties in speaking a command to the device and in hearing the device speak back. It's also obviously not their native language if their native language is a sign language. Finally, we have the problem of what's called the deaf accent, which is not exactly an accent, but is a kind of vocal difference that deaf people and hard of hearing people who speak sometimes have a difference to the way that they speak. So obviously from an accessibility perspective, the rise of voice-activated technology could be a real problem. Because if this becomes the norm for how people interact with computers, deaf people could get locked out of using this technology altogether. Now we know that deaf people are interested in using voice-activated technologies, or at least would be if they could sign to them. The graph that we've got up on the screen comes from Glasser et al.'s work. They did a large survey of American deaf and hard of hearing people, and our research has found similar results. Our research, in fact, has been even more positive than Glasser's work, although we're doing interviews rather than large-scale surveys. And what we have been finding is everyone we've interviewed either really wants the technology or don't personally want it, but could see why it would be appealing for other deaf people and a positive thing for the deaf community. I have to acknowledge there's got to be some bias in there because the sort of person who says, yes, please interview me about possibly designing an assistive technology for sign language, are probably the people who are interested in having such a technology around. Okay, so if you've already got one of these devices at home, this is going to be familiar to you. If you don't, I want to run very quickly through how do you interact with one of these technologies. You generally start by saying something to get the device's attention. This is the "Hey Alexa" phase of the interaction. The device then acknowledges you. This is usually a little ding. You then give your command, and the device optionally has some kind of acknowledgement, either another ding, or for a device with a screen, the text pops up on the screen as you're speaking, and then you get your result, or you get an update as the device does something for you. So, for example, "Hey Google, what's the weather like today?"
It's 14 and cloudy. Today, there'll be showers with a high of 16 and a low of 6.
And obviously you can't see that, but the words popped up on the screen as I was speaking. The idea of our project, the Auslan Communication Technologies Pipeline, is to create a device that can do all of that, but in Auslan. The way we've conceptually broken this up is into 3 modules. There needs to be a recognition module to recognize Auslan signs. This needs to handle the attention-getting phase, as well as recognizing the meaning of both individual signs and full sign utterances. There's a processing module, which needs to understand what the utterance actually means and act on that appropriately. And then there's a production module, which produces signs to sign back, whether that's status, because you've just told it to do something, or information, because you've just asked it a question. Now, we are basing our technology on what already exists. Personal assistant devices are a concrete thing that you can go out and buy. But it's still a new variation on the technology created for a new audience. So to make sure we're getting it right, we've taken a participatory design approach, which means that our end users are participating in the design process. This is really important to me because it means that throughout the design process and in the resulting technology, we are celebrating and centering deaf people's needs, abilities, and insights. Participatory design is also important in that it improves the development process. Every decision that we make is about addressing deaf people's needs and wants in the new technology. It also means from an AI perspective, the data we can collect will be focused and appropriate and meet the needs of the community in a way that isn't going to be violating community or cultural norms and isn't going to be appropriating data that might already be out there. It means that the behavior from the system is going to be what deaf people expect it to be. And it means that as we're developing prototypes, we can work with deaf people, the speakers of the language, to verify the accuracy and the usability of everything we're creating. Okay, so let's break down. What is this device probably going to look and behave like? Well, we're going to need the "Hey Alexa" phase. Paralleling that, possibly this will be a stylized wave, and possibly a unique name sign. But we also have people with a different school of thought, which is that instead of having a camera always on in their house, they want it to be a bit more of a push-to-talk idea, where there's a button on the device, or on their smartphone or their smartwatch, that they press, that turns on the device, wakes up the camera. For the folks who want to use a special name sign, we're still trying to figure out what that might actually be. So far we've been referring to it as the Alyssa, because my team's animator thought it was funny to pun on Alexa. But, sorry, I'll remove the mask for this one. For people who lip read, Alexa and Alyssa don't actually have any difference. So this is a problem for the deaf folks that we're working with. So we need a spoken name that's easy for oral deaf people to pronounce, and that matches up with a name sign. A couple of weekends ago, we actually went to the Deaf Festival and got some community feedback on that, but we haven't been able to go through the data yet. We also need the device not so much to ding for acknowledgement, but to pay attention, which means making eye contact. In order to make eye contact, our device has a body. This is, so far, Alyssa, our main avatar. But there's a number of elements of linguistic and cultural considerations that were not things I was expecting when we went into this project. So we did know some things, like the fact that Australia-wide there's 2 major dialects with then variations between community centres in Auslan. We knew that Auslan has a bit more grammatical flexibility than a spoken language like English. It tends to get referred to as topic comment rather than subject, verb, object, or variations thereof. We knew that Auslan has a reliance on context for meaning, which can make question asking and direction modified verbs really difficult from an AI perspective. The device might not be able to tell until we train it that help you and help me mean the same thing in the English translation. But one of the problems that our Deaf Advisory Panel raised was the idea of lazy or informal signing. The idea that when you're signing at speed, the gestures can merge together a little bit, can move, change handshake, change location, but this may not be recognised. A little bit like the way your English-speaking Alexa won't necessarily understand you unless you enunciate clearly. Our Deaf Advisory Panel also raised the fact that there are important cultural norms of communication within the deaf community. These include things like the fact that there's not really a neutral inflection when it comes to signing, because emotion and facial movements convey meaning and can alter what signs mean that are otherwise identical. So our idea here is that the device should probably have a default casual or friendly tone, but be able to change its tone to match either the user, if they're really sad and upset, being bright and happy may not be appropriate, or if they've asked to say news and the top result is, no, the Queen's just died, again, being bright and happy may not be totally appropriate. We've also had a request that for dramatic or emergency updates, the character should be a lot more bombastic and big, because that's how deaf people would communicate if there's something emergency going on. We also had folks ask about whether or not the device would tell jokes, because the English-speaking ones do. That's a solid maybe from our end, because we would have to motion capture the specific jokes in a way that we can eventually get away from when it comes to generating responses using AI. Because we'll have a data set of signs and signed utterances, we may be able to long-term generate new signing, but the specific idioms and patterns of jokes won't be captured in that data set. So that's something we would have to specifically plan. Speaking of motion capture, we do have some photos here of my research assistant Julie, all gussied up in the motion capture gear. So the functionality that deaf folks are after overlaps a lot with what hearing people use these devices for, but importantly, there's a couple of extra types of notifications that deaf people would like. We're tending to call these smart alerts. So this is the sort of thing that a hearing person might hear on the radio. You know, there's a strike, there's a crash, things that deaf people don't casually get, as well as environmental sounds. So deaf folks do want to know what's going on in their environment and can't necessarily hear if a dog's barking or a car alarm's going off. So they'd like the device to be able to detect that and tell them. Okay, I'm almost out of time, but I do want to finish off with a short video showing the interactions between a deaf person and our device. This is so far just a prototype, so there's a little bit of trickery going on, but this shows you what an interaction should look like. Obviously, this is not the end of the road. At the moment, we're in the third year of a 3-year funded grant, and we're hoping to have a prototype that can recognise 15 to 20 commands and respond in a sensible way. I'm currently seeking more funding, so fingers crossed, to keep building on this project. We want to be able to make something in the long term that's at least as good at understanding Auslan as the English-speaking devices are at understanding English. So I'll finish up by saying a couple of key points. Voice-activated technologies are great. They have a lot of positives, but they're also inaccessible for deaf people. And deaf people don't want to be left behind when it comes to technology. They want access to technology in their native language. But that means my goal is not just make a technology that understands signing, but something that is culturally appropriate. And we do that by working with the deaf community. Thank you all. I'd like to open the floor to questions.
We do have a good amount of time for questions.
Thank you so much. It's fascinating. Can you I'm interested that you're recognising from your work the issues about variation and dialectal variation, or individual variation, and perhaps variation depending on age and gender and all sorts of things. Can you tell us more about the input into the process of training these systems? Because I'm sort of wondering what kind of material you need, and perhaps where the most difficult parts are. So is it about particular aspects of sign articulation that kind of lead to the most complex ambiguities, perhaps, something like that?
Yeah. So at the moment, we're taking a sort of a bit of a mixed approach for machine learning and natural language processing. We'd really like to tackle it primarily as a natural language processing problem. And there's, again, a lot of work that's been done on spoken and written language, but very little done on processing sign languages and processing video as language input. So in terms of data gathering, we're looking ideally at getting native signers in front of cameras. From a technical perspective, we're looking at both standard video cameras and also depth-sensitive cameras, because that gives us a bit more nuance and a bit more of an ability to detect things like location in the signing space. So the plan for the end of the 3-year grant is to have a data set of, I think we've got 15 native signers on our books who've been interviewed, getting them back in and getting them to record how they would sign specific sets of phrases. So things like turn on the lights in the kitchen, what's the weather today? And then sort of looking for how much similarity and difference do we have here. Of course, first prototype, we're probably going to be focusing on the Brisbane variant, because that's where we're based, where most of the data we're going to be collecting will be coming from. But longer term, we'd like to have a much more varied data set with probably input from each of the major cities, with deaf communities around Australia, and then possibly looking at, are there ways we could make this more flexible, make this something that people could train themselves if there's, perhaps home signs that they use, would like to be able to adapt. But that's way in the future.
Hi, it was really interesting. I wanted to just ask, maybe this is something you guys considered and you've dismissed, but I was wondering about when you're trying to activate this so that it comes up sort of ready for deaf or hard of hearing people to use. Why is, you could, instead of using something like an oral command, you couldn't use, say, something like a clap or clicks or some other sort of sound-making gesture?
So basically it didn't really come up in any of the deaf folks that we talked to. So the data that we had on how people would like to activate the device came from a set of interviews that we did, and also an honours student that I worked with who did a virtual reality prototype, so that deaf folks put on the headset and got to roam around this virtual apartment and interact with just a English, not signing, but English text-based device that, as deaf folks signed, had an interpreter. The student triggered off the correct response, and after that, we talked to the deaf folks around, you woke that device up by waving. Did you like that? Did you not like that? Are there other things that you would like? And from that, it really came out in those two main camps of the wave, the name sign, or the device. I think one person may have mentioned a clap, but that's a very fuzzy memory, so don't necessarily quote that.
Oh, that's cool. I just thought maybe you had looked at it and there was a reason why it hadn't been. That's cool. Thank you.
We've got another hand down here.
I might just jump. I have a question from, so we've been hearing quite a lot from people who are interested in language learning techniques this week. In some cases, people who are not part of a big language, but perhaps trying to learn their own relearn their own traditional language or trying to maintain a language. I wonder, is there any capacity for these kind of systems to actually be like a language learning or maintenance technique?
Maybe. There is some research, which I'm not only vaguely aware of, but essentially for English speaking, we're beginning to see young kids learning English in the way the Google Home and Amazon Alexa speak English. And like I said, not totally across this literature, but there was some slightly alarmist, oh no, the children are learning the language wrong, takes on that. So that would definitely be something to consider if kids are learning Auslan from the way the avatar signs. Probably more useful would be if we can break it up into some of its different components. So if you're learning to sign, having something that you sign and it says, did you mean this thing? This is what I think you've just signed, because that way you know how intelligible your signing actually is. Or possibly having the avatar as a bit of a tutor, but again, some caveats there.
Yeah, this is just fabulous. I love this. Just a question, I guess, for the future, whether you see after you've trained in a more diverse and have a more diverse data set, whether you'd be planning some evaluation phase where, with a wider set of people and in the wild, if you like, to see how people actually do use it and how well it performs.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to. Yeah.
I'm wondering if this kind of technology is also being developed for other sign language, like American Sign Language, and if you've tapped into what they're doing and how they're sort of progressing in other parts of the world.
Yeah, so from what I've seen, there's a bit of work, well, there's a lot of work on the sign recognition side, particularly in languages like BSL and ASL. There's a little bit of work on how do we generate signs back out. There's a New Zealand group called Korte Technologies that have this absolutely amazing signing avatar. But as far as I know, we seem to be the only group in the world who's trying to look at the whole pipeline of recognize, process, and respond. Someone for that?
Thank you. Thanks for the really interesting presentation. It's a great project, very ambitious and exciting. And my question's a little bit tangential I guess, to your main goals. But I've always been curious about why these virtual assistants are always female, and I'm wondering whether that was a decision that was part of the group and whether that got discussed, and whether there's a reason behind that.
Yeah, so our animator has actually made a series of 8, 10, something like that, avatars to demonstrate that you can actually vary this quite a lot. So we've got male, female, slightly androgynous, we've got adults, we've got children, we've got avatars of very clearly different races, because this is the sort of thing that, again, the deaf folk we're working with have said, I'd really like to be able to make it feel like it fits in my home. Possibly different members of the family might like to choose different avatars that they interact with. So the adults might like an adult and the kids might like to have a kid and things like that.
Well done.
Time for one more.
Hey Jess, thanks. It was great to see your work progressing. I just wondered, watching the avatar and your recording process, are the non-manual features coming from the face of your research assistant, and how are you kind of, do you want to talk a little bit about the technical process of that? Because that's really interesting.
If I can get that to the video. Maybe not. There we go. Okay, so I'll get that playing. While we talk. So yes, the avatar's movements are all based on motion capture from Julie. So yes, she's talking to herself. But if you notice the avatar's face movements, basically the setup we have is the motion capture suit captures movements, the gloves capture the hand movements, and of all things we're using an iPad, because the iPad has some of the best low-level commercial detect the face and the face movements. All of which then got fed into the avatar, which our animator then took and tweaked and made sure anything that wasn't clear became more clear, and things like that.
I'll just add quickly on, I think it was Judith's point there about doing some evaluation, because I've watched quite a few different avatars, and I have to say that one is quite captivating. So I want to just say congratulations on really actually focusing on that, because I know for children, they're just not interested in an ant face. So well done.
Yeah, thank you. We actually had a moment in our evaluation, and basically we did a first prototype and then did an evaluation and design workshop. And we ended up with a moment where the avatar's hair moved as she made a sign on the forehead, and every single deaf person in the workshop was like, wow, that's amazing, it's so realistic. And then one of them said, but it's also slightly distracting.
Let's thank Jess again.